Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Today's a Q&A with some quite wise people. Our topic is time, and our participants have watched the podcasts in the Time series, which you can see or listen to at my website, drchris.life. I'll do a quick summary now of part 4, Is Our Time Running Out?, before we go into our Q&A. As we get older, we generally experience time as passing more quickly, but our experience of time varies a lot. For example, at the end of a really busy day, you may feel as though time has flown by, and yet today's morning feels like it was days ago. Your mind hasn't been paying much attention to time all day, making the passage of time really fast. But when recalling the many events of the day, it feels like it's been a very long one. And we may feel the opposite if the day was boring with not much to do. Time drags during the day, but looking back on it, there's hardly anything to remember, and it feels like time went by with nothing happening. It was short. This is because your brain is most interested in new experiences. And when there's high activity and a high rate of new experiences, more memories are encoded in your brain and time seems to go by quickly. It's as if we're too busy to notice the time is passing. But later, our subjective experience of time is determined by the number of new memories we created. Our brain's timekeeper seems to conclude the more new memories, the longer it must have been. It appears the more novelty we pay attention to, the more frames per second we record in our movie for the experience, as it were. As with a slow motion film, the more frames, the slower the action appears. The key in applying this to live a little better is to engage with novelty. Going to new places, meeting new people, reading different kinds of books, watching different types of films, learning a new language. Just learning new things and new skills, any way of introducing novelty into your life will form the foundation for memories that will stand out in your mind and stretch your sense of time. And a retrospective time-enhancing tip: recall your day as vividly as possible at the end of it. Spend some time reflecting on what has happened that day. Even better, write these recollections in a journal or say them out loud. Anything to encode them into richer memories to make them more unique. All right, so let's go to our wonderful friends in the Q&A portion of this discussion. And we have a range of ages in this call. I think I'm the eldest. I think that's right, isn't it, Terry? Yeah, marginally. But this ought to be interesting because I think there are differences that have been researched around age and time perception. So let's see. I think ladies first this time. Who would like to kick off with questions, insights, observations?
I can start.
Thanks, Colin.
What came to mind when I listened to this, my father, who's 88, every time I ask him, are you looking forward to doing something or coming to visit, he immediately stops me and says, I don't look to the future. I'm looking only at today.
Huh.
I'm not wishing my life away. So
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
so I've stopped asking him, even though, I want to know whether or not he's looking forward to it. But I think it's really important to reflect on, and not just because your life is coming to a close, but I think it's just important to day by day, to look at it day by day.
It is very interesting, isn't it? I mean, there's a certain level at which, of course, planning is an important thing. right? And making sure, for example, one is provided for one's retirement, or planning any project. But your father's talking about something else entirely. I think, and you, I think, summed it up nicely by saying about living in the moment or living for the day. And this is quite difficult. Um, uh, is your sense? Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions about your father? Would that be all right?
Of course.
Um, when he says that, he's not maudlin, right? He's not unhappy. He's not.
No,
Yeah,
no, he's just very clear that he doesn't want to. He'll say, "I don't want to wish my life away."
yeah, yeah. And we can I think we can assume that what he wants to do is enjoy every little last moment he's got.
Yes.
Yep.
He doesn't have to be quite as rigid, but
Yes. Yeah. But you know what I'm saying. I mean, there's one thing I've often thought about this. It's a bit of a thought experiment. It's a counterfactual, but here it goes. These days there's some talk about cracking the code for eternal life. Like they're doing this research on what causes aging, the shortening of the telomeres in the body, etc. And I just hope they never crack it. Personally, um, I mean, there's the question of, I mean, imagine what the time experience of someone who's immortal would be, right? But I just don't think human beings would grow up if they were immortal, right? In the sense that I think the knowledge, like your father's knowledge of our own impermanence, uh, is a very important fact that directs the mind to the present moment, right? And actually is the thing that's likely to make us happy, right? And I mean, I could be completely wrong, but because who knows what the future's going to be? Well, probably all cyborgs anyway. Will be hybrid creatures. But I think this sense of, first off, the passing of time and its finite duration. That type of consciousness of time, I think, is very, very healthy. So, in some of the Buddhist communities, I think in Asia, I'm just trying to remember which ones it was. But I'll tell you what I'm thinking of. They have in the monasteries, they literally have skeletons in closets, because there are these meditations they do on the stages of decay of the corpse, on what they call the rotting of the corpse. Sounds horrific, doesn't it? But it's actually not. The idea is that it concentrates the mind on impermanence and encourages the monks to pay attention to the present moment, to not be living in the past and the future. So I think psychologically, an awareness of our mortality is very, very healthy, and actually enables us to live rather than, as you say, as your father says, wishing life away. Yeah.
yeah.
So now I can see where your wisdom comes from.
No, but it's made me think about it now. Every time I say that to anybody, it's made
Yeah.
me think, not about life ending, but just take a moment to think about right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And yes, because there is a sort of implication that if we're always looking forward to something,
Mhm.
it's like that's going to be better than now. So we're discounting the now. Right, tomorrow is going to be great, right? Now, of course, it's not wrong to have to be looking forward to certain events, but have you noticed they often don't live up to the hype? Or even if they do, it passes pretty quickly. And often people feel a bit depressed afterwards because now the excitement's all gone. Right. So, yeah, a lot of wisdom packed into the very simple words of your father. Alrighty, who's next?
I feel like that's a good segue to talk about the holiday paradox, which
Yes.
that fascinated me.
Yeah.
Thinking about like when like holiday for me, it's your mind's engaged, you're present, you're interested, you're purposefully living. So like being mindful of that, and how do you maintain that? Like I find it made me think also of my aging parents who
Mm,
you know they they don't do a lot. They sit in front of the TV for most of the day, and
mm,
then they're just not engaging their minds or their bodies. So the conversation is always the same three questions. Did you work today? How's the weather and how are the kids? That's it. Every conversation, then okay, bye. So I just how thinking about how to maintain that holiday paradox in the everyday by keeping your mind engaged, keeping your body engaged, and really living that purposeful life. It's not a question, just more of an observation in
mm.
that whole concept of integrating holiday paradox into your everyday.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I'm just thinking about that. I mean, one of the problems I think uh, is that the problem's actually thinking too much. All right. So we get just sort of lost in thought. Now, let me see if I can reel this one in. So um, when we're on holidays, and let's say you've gone somewhere that's new, and you're having experiences you've never had before. Uh, yes, you'll be mapping it onto experiences you've had in the past, but relatively speaking, you're sort of opening the portals to new stuff, right? So you're actually paying attention, and uh, relatively speaking, there's less sort of reminiscence and thinking about the future. There's more about engaging with the present, right? Now, in everyday life, because your question is how do you take that sense back into everyday life? The familiarity of everyday life entices us to either reminisce or project into the future, right? So, and your example of your parents is like a really instructive, if I can put it that way, instructive example of the narrowing of our experience when everything just looks, in that case, like it's encapsulated to three questions, right? So my mind naturally goes to the practice of meditation again. So why? You're basically training yourself to notice experience. It doesn't matter what the experience is. It can be body sensations, it can be sounds, it can be visual sensations, it can be emotions, it can be thoughts. But all of that experience shows up in consciousness, right? And as long as you keep tugging your attention back to just sheer witnessing of what shows up in consciousness, you're not thinking per se. You're not off, separate in, captured by thought, right? And that's the problem in everyday life is that we're actually not we're not here. we're in a thought train that's about here, right? So, when I practice, I don't do long meditations like I used to. I'll probably just do 20 minutes in the morning and, sometimes at night. But I try to, in all the small transitions, and there's thousands of them during a day, but let's say hundreds. When you first sit down at your desk, when you're you put the kettle on to make a cup of tea, you're walking from A to B, you go to the bathroom, you finish at one task, you're about to do another task. They're all little tiny opportunities to meditate, in the sense of being present to what's here right now, right? And its uniqueness. And this is why I think, things like, even like a 1 minute walk into a garden and just to look at something, like a flower or a leaf, or smell something or hear something, but deliberately. That these are practices that if we practice them, they become habits, right? If we don't practice them, our world shrinks into concepts, right? And the more shrinking that happens, the less engagement we have with new thoughts, new feelings. It could end up as 3 questions. Yeah. Okay. Who's next?
I can throw in some thoughts. So one of the things that struck me in this and the previous podcast as well, but here I feel like it was more poignant, is the notion of the present, when you're involved in something in the present moment and it seems to go by quickly, but then when you look back on it, it feels very full and very rich. Yeah. That was an interesting concept to me, the relation of those two things, because it seems like to me the optimal would almost be the present moment feels like it's long because you're really in it and you're really absorbed in it. And it also, when you look back on it, it feels long, right? And so when you said, throughout like, oh, well, yeah, the subjective experience seems like when the time's passing quickly and we're really engrossed in something, that's sort of the optimal because it has this rich memory experience. Yeah. So I'm curious your thoughts on that, because it was an interesting difference from what I would anticipate.
There are experiences that are, as you describe, expanded sense of time duration in the present, and looking back, that sense of spaciousness. Or it would be one of those. So, and often meditation and sometimes hypnosis. These and obviously psychotropic substances like psilocybin or LSD or whatever. I don't know. Is the first part of my answer. What's optimal? It does seem to be useful to have time passing quickly during the day when we're working, but then retrospectively to think that was a really full, rich day and plenty happened, and there's that sense of I'm not wasting my time, I'm not wasting my life. There's plenty happening. I think that is a healthy thing, but I also see what you're getting at here. Is it optimal to have spaciousness both in the moment and my gut feeling? I'm not sure why I'm going to say this, but my gut feeling is yes. You can hear the little question mark in the yes. So let me see if I can dig out why I'm thinking that. In those moments where time does seem to stand more still and seems to expand in the moment, they do seem to me to be inherently significant. but I don't know whether they're always good. For example, I was driving on a wet road, as a much younger man, probably driving a little too fast, to be honest, down a slight hill, and a guy came from through a stop sign on the right and collected me amidships, right? And so I'm now heading down this hill on a really slippery, wet road, hit the brakes, and I'm just sort of basically aquaplaning. And I could see this parked car coming up. I was heading straight for it. And my perception of time altered dramatically. It really expanded. And it felt like it took, I don't know, 30 seconds. It probably only took one. As I watched this car approaching, and I watched the front of my car crumple up towards my windscreen. Miraculously walked out of there without a scratch. The other car, by the way, didn't stop. He sort of bounced off me and kept going. Yeah, I know. I've often thought about that person, what they carried in their mind, not knowing what happened to the driver of my vehicle. But so obviously, people start talking about their life flashing before their eyes, or so I think there's different functions of this alteration of time perception. I'm not sure what the function there is of that. It was a very profound experience, as you could probably tell. And I know that mountain climbers have similar experiences. They talk about, and skydivers, about time seeming to go really slow, and they feel like subjectively they've got all the time in the world to, and elite sports people talk about this as well. Everything slowed down. I seem to have plenty of time. They've actually done some studies. I've forgotten how they actually did this, but they did some brain studies on this experience, and people are not perceiving faster than normal. There's something else going on, which is more about our subjective sense of it later, right? And I've got a feeling it marks these occasions as highly, highly, highly significant, and it retains every tiny detail. So again, using that film metaphor, there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of frames that normally we wouldn't pay any attention to, right? So I think a rambling answer, but I think broadly speaking, life is richer and fuller when we're paying attention to lots of details in life. And so generally speaking, it probably is a good idea if we're expansive in the moment and so on. But you can see I'm a little bit undecided, because clearly it's also good for time to pass quickly at work when we're doing productive stuff. So I don't know.
The common denominator in it, though, is that the memory experience of it is what we want to maximize, that fullness of that memory experience.
Yeah, especially as we get older. I think that's really important. It brings us back to Colin's dad again, in a way as well. He wants to be encoding everything that's happening now really closely, right? And he will have then this sense in which that was a full day, as against that day raced by, because lots of frames per second. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Who's next?
You've only got me left, because I know Chris has to speak shortly. So
yes,
the analogy that really got me was the library analogy, and it made me think, okay, I need to add another wing to my library because it's pretty damn full. Or I need to go back and dust off some of those old memories and relive them again, and
Yeah.
maybe have a different perspective to it.
Yeah.
So, and then the other thought that I had in like listening to it was, we make a habit at our household of discussing at dinner what happened that day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially with the kids, because then we learn things, and then we also learn what excites them, the memories that they held on to the most.
Yeah.
Which gives us a bit of an emotional sense of how their day was versus the list of things that they basically did.
Yeah.
So those are just thoughts I had, because
I know they're both great thoughts.
Yeah, because the other wise folks here have covered everything else.
They stole everything that you were going to say.
No, they didn't stole. They just
bastards.
They said it so much better than what I could, but I did it so well that I had nothing left to grab onto. Like, okay, put that book away.
Okay, so so there's two things here. There's the library metaphor, and there's the discussing the day. Just on the library metaphor, it's really important way of conceptualizing aging. Obviously, the longer you've been on the planet, potentially anyway, the bigger your library. You've got lots and lots of experiences. And it's one of the reasons, there are two reasons for the slowing down of our cognitive processes. Partly it's just purely physiological, from neurons and neural nets, and just the processing speed slows down as we get older. So there's one reason we lay down less frames per second, right? But the other reason is because of the size of the library, right? So to process anything, it has to run through a system that's way more complicated, to get properly filed, as it were, than for a little kid who's hardly got any books in there, right? So that's another reason why our perceptions are slower. But of course, it's a reason our perceptions are deeper. And psychologists talk about this in terms of what they call the distinction between fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. All right, so from about the age of 30 onwards, there's a consistent and inevitable decline in fluid intelligence. Right, and so this is in the mid 40s up to 50s, it can be a crisis for people, because if they've built all their success on fluid intelligence, they're in trouble. So they just work harder and harder and harder and harder and longer hours, trying to stave off the young guns, But what they're missing, and there's a great book on this by Arthur C. Brooks called Strength to Strength, where he says we've got to pivot from one strength to another strength in life. And so in midlife, we've got to pivot from fluid intelligence to crystallized intelligence. So this crystallized intelligence is the ability to see deep patterns in things, to where our intuitions are more likely to be wise because they're based on this big library, where our judgments are going to be better. It's slower but deeper. I'm not sure how this is going to relate back into time perception, but I'm apart from the fact of the processing and so on. But I think it's an important distinction. The other thing, it reminds me a bit of Colin's dad again. I think this is one of the reasons why older age is a time for more contemplation. And that is, there's a lot more significance to things, and one traces things through all that one has learned and so on. So that's a different kind of uniqueness in experience that's more in here than out there, right? But it's not inevitable, as in Karen's description of her parents' 3 questions. Who knows what's going on in their brains? I don't want to be unkind. But yeah, so I think that's that part. The other part, your kids and the dinner. This is a really old tradition, and one that we ought to rediscover. You know, you've got it in place. Super important, and it helps people. You're training your kids, apart from all the intel it gives you about what they like and they're interested in, but it's training them to think about their day and to appreciate what they've done, and to get into that deep habit. It also means it's a great way of sharing and having a joint narrative. But I'm sure it adds significance to the day for everyone. As we recall, it's a bit like I was saying, you know, in the introduction there about detailed recall, and you know, even suggested maybe say it out loud. Well, here you are having a conversation is a great way of doing it. Alrighty, wonderful. Have you noticed that time has flown? But hopefully, retrospectively, it will feel like it was a really full and sort of you know, it was a lovely desultory stroll through the material. Okay, I'll stop being silly. As always, thank you so much. Always enjoy these, and I look forward to our next one. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.